years, was going on for years. Now, as I say, after Flint let him off the hook, and they never informed the law enforcement of Creer's crimes. Numerous rapes they were. Immediately after the board cleaned up Creer's record, he left for Florida, where he applied for a new teaching job. When the Florida School Board, who was going to hire Creer, made an inquiry of the Flint Board of Education on Creer's character, they were given a glowing report on what a great teacher Creer was as part of the deal that they had made. Based on these recommendations, Creer was hired in Florida as a teacher, and over the next 7-8 years, he began assaulting more girls at his new school. When it was disclosed, one girl was so distraught, God help us, she committed suicide. And we can attribute this kind of response to the Flint School Board for letting this guy off. Well, what happened was in Florida, they had trouble getting witnesses and things like that. These were young girls at the time, much younger than the girls that he had assaulted in Flint. So, and they had some statute limitation problems in Florida. But Flint had a different situation. This is kind of a poetic irony. Our statute of limitations is 6 years. And after 20 years, we went after Creer. And people say, how can you do that? Well, here's the law. This is the law not only in Michigan, but every state. If you leave the state after committing a crime, and it's before the 6 years statute has run, the statute is tolled. In other words, it stops running. The theory being, if you left the state, there's no way of getting you. We don't know where you are. But if you're in the state, we have a better chance of finding you. That comes from the common law. There's a limitation on how long you can hold a prosecution open unless the statute is tolled. That is, it's stopped running. In this case, Creer left the state right after he made the deal with the school board, probably a couple months later, and he went to Florida. Bang, the statute stops running. Stops running. It went on for 15 years and it never ran. So when we found out he was in Florida, we still had 5.5 years to prosecute him because the statute stopped running when he left. So, in this case, Prosecutor Bush had an extradition of Creer back here to prosecute him under the old crimes that happened 15, 20 years ago. And he convicted him of it. And this case has gone to the appellate courts and upheld. Creer's argument was the statute would run. The court said, no, when you leave the state, it's tolled. And they convicted you before the statute would run after they brought you back here. And he went to prison for something like 50 years. The point I'm making here is, are we creating another George Creer case if we don't prosecute this Anthony? We clearly have a case, as they did 25 years ago. He didn't register as required by state law. Obviously, he's left the state, as that Channel 5 story says. He still hasn't registered. Like back 25 years ago, some people's attitude is, good riddance. He's not our problem anymore. That's a terrible approach to take. Because under the old approach by the old school board, one child is dead and numerous other ones have been imposed upon with criminal activity. They've been raped. And they wouldn't have been if the Board of Education back then was more interested in protecting children than preserving, as it turned out, their phony reputation. Now, I talked to David Layton yesterday on whether he's going to proceed against Anthony or let the Creer syndrome play out. In other words, letting other children be exposed to assaults by a pedophile that we could have stopped. He told me he was looking at the case again and that he would let me know. Well, I'm sure, I'll call him again next week and ask him what he's going to do about this thing. But it doesn't make any difference where the children are, Flint or Kansas City or Sacramento. They're entitled to be protected. We have an obligation. We can't just transfer the problem to another area because we got rid of it. That's just unacceptable. We have an obligation to all children, wherever they may be. Hopefully, we will see a prosecution of this case. Let me go on here. Here's another case. This is a predator that needed prompt attention by officials that, in my opinion, didn't get it. Here's Channel 12 story. Can you run that for me, please?
State police completed a forensic investigation that authorities had all the evidence they needed. The investigation began last year with a mother's worried call to police. She feared her underage daughter was in the company of this man, 38-year-old James Houck. He lived in the basement of his mother's Swartz Creek home.
When the officer arrived, he did meet the guy at the door, and the girl was there.
The girl returned to her mother, but once inside the house, police found 64 CDs containing over 100,000 pictures of child pornography. Houck was arrested, then released, because at the time, there wasn't enough evidence to prosecute him.
If it was my neighbor, I would certainly be upset about it, or he lived in my neighborhood. Unfortunately, we only have a set amount of resources to work with, and I think that in this case, the police department did everything that we could with the resources that we had.
Houck's home computer was turned over to state police to be analyzed. Swartz Creek Police Chief Rick Klolinger says because of an increase in computer crimes, analysts didn't get to the case until just recently. It was a backup that lasted nearly a year and a half.
Would it have been nice to have that computer evidence obtained within 4 or 5 days from the date that we made the original arrest, and then to be able to have him into court a couple days later to arraign him on a charge? That'd be wonderful, but I don't think it's not realistic.
But there is a solution.
I would think that if we could get more people trained to be able to obtain that evidence out of these computers would help speed it up.
Houck remains here in jail on nearly $1 million bond. He was charged yesterday with 15 felony counts of manufacturing child porn, 15 counts of using a computer to manufacture child porn, 1 count of child porn, and 1 count of using a computer to commit a crime. He is due in court this Friday. Reporting live in Flint, BC O'Neill, ABC 12.
That's ridiculous. I mean, it's totally ridiculous. Here's what it says. Due to the backlog of state police computer crime investigations, it took more than a year and a half after police began their investigation to reach a point where the charges could be brought. This fellow named Houch, who has no prior criminal record, and listen to the rationale of this police department here, was watched closely by the police while the case was being investigated, the chief said. Now, let me tell you something. I was a prosecutor 23 years. In a year and a half after this porn was found, they could make an arrest. Listen, This guy was found in possession, a 20-year felony. So you got 5 other crimes you can get him at. It's going to take a year. You can still charge him on the felony, get him put in jail, get him convicted, and the community would be much better served, and I'm sure feel much safer if he was in jail and not wandering around in their neighborhood where the police say they were watching. How much can they watch? Well, that's a ridiculous statement. Like this was as good as having this guy in jail and out of the community. This statement is almost as ridiculous as the excuse that the state police computer experts didn't have time to check the pervert's computer for a year and a half. Come on, this is not a larceny of a store case. This is a guy who is a pervert, exposing children to his perversion for an entire year and a half. You know, these kind of cases have to be given top priority, even before murders, as far as I'm concerned. At least a murderer is arrested and in jail. Often they don't even set a bond for him. You know, what other case is more important than one unnecessarily exposing our kids to a deviant? You know, they say, well, we didn't have enough resources. Listen, we've done this before. You could have engaged a private forensic computer examiner. Forensic means they testify in court. Long before a year and a half. He could have checked out the sites. He could have checked the internet providers. He could have done all these things. He could have searched to see who he was dealing with. You know, the computer leaves incriminating information. And you know, an expert could provide that information. And they could have it ready. Let's give them a week. They could have it probably ready in a couple of days. You know, a peace of mind is worth a lot more than a few dollars you'd have to pay for a private forensic expert to testify, where the case could be processed to arrest in a week, not a year and a half. It's not, you know, it's not good enough to blame it on lack of resources. Someone is guilty of neglect of duty here. You know, the city council has an obligation to do an investigation and establish responsibility, so it won't happen again. I don't know if the police chief was responsible for this. He did make an interesting statement. He said, if this person lived in my neighborhood, I would be upset too. No, I think there's something would have been done if he lived in his neighborhood. But anyway, whether it's the state police fault or the local police fault, somebody's responsible to let this guy sit for a year and a half in a neighborhood, and we knew him to be a child pervert, and nothing is done other than say, hey, we're checking very closely. We're driving by 2 or 3 times a day. I think that city council should find out what the hell happened here. Moving on, and then I want to mention here, this is not an unusual set of circumstances. Here's a teacher coach. This was in today's paper, Tuesday, November 7th. Charged with online solicitation. A Detroit middle school teacher and youth travel hockey coach was charged Monday with attempting to solicit a 13-year-old boy in an online chat room. And the fellow's name is Fawkes, Ray Thomas Fawkes. Fawkes is a 7th grade science teacher at Columbia Middle School in Detroit and is head coach of the Plymouth Clinton Hockey Association midget level 15 and 16-year-old travel hockey team, according to Cox's office. He joined the Detroit Public Schools in March after leaving a teaching post for unspecified reasons in Livonia. Now, what the heck could those unspecified reasons be? That's the same thing. It's the Creer case. It's the Anthony case. Now, these school boards have got to be more responsible than this. They're worrying about, well, what will the public think? Well, now what does the public think when you expose them? This is an outrage. Got to be better cooperation between school districts when they know about people who are deviants. They can't just pass it off to someone else or some other district and expose other children to it. Like I said, we have obligations to children wherever they are. Well, let me move on and look at this record-breaking story. It's a new news story about the corruption investigation into the city of Burton, into their top officials, including Mayor Smiley. It kind of broke open, this new thing broke open last Monday night, apparently, when the appointment by four Burton City Council people appointed Jeff Majors to be a Burton City Councilman in an opening they had there. Now, to say the least, this applicant raised some eyebrows because Major was Smiley's public works director for a number of years, was eminently involved in all of the land development projects now under investigation by the federal grand jury. The question is, where's this Major coming from? Why would the city council, who had a plurality to challenge Smiley on some of these crazy things he does, put on somebody that was this close to Smiley? Or is he this close? That's the question. But let me give you a little history on this issue. A guy named Rizzo, Blake Rizzo, a big land developer out in the city of Burton, in Grand Blanc and those places. Very active guy. Well, Rizzo made allegations of bribing Mayor Smiley to get favorable treatment on his land development projects in the Smiley administration. Since that time, Smiley's administrative assistant, a fellow by the name of Charles Abbey, has been indicted for taking bribes from Rizzo. He was given land at a big discount to help him get some of his projects through. Now keep in mind, this is the top guy next to Smiley. Now, Rizzo pleaded guilty to a state charge for bribery and insurance fraud, and then he's turned to state's evidence to save his own neck. Now, keep in mind, Rizzo and Smiley are very close friends. Besides their working relationship, for example, Smiley stood up for Rizzo in his most recent marriage. So they're good friends. You know, at this meeting last Monday where Major was appointed, he said he had testified before the grand jury on numerous occasions regarding Smiley's involvement in these deals and what was going on in the city of Burton that the feds are investigating. Here's the story that he had in there. It says, New Burton Council appointee pulls no punches. And it says, Councilman Danny Wells, who often sides with Mayor Charles Smiley in a divided city government, said he's sad Majors is going negative. What's that mean? That Majors is telling the truth? That's negative? It's negative for Smiley. Why would Wells be looking out for somebody like Smiley who may be involved in this thing? And then Wells went on to say he's going to lose the respect of a lot of people, good people, if he continues down this road. Down this road, what, of testifying? He goes in, he swears he's going to tell the truth.